On my wedding day, every seat for my family sat empty. Then I learned why. They chose my sister's celebration instead, until one message. During the reception changed everything. I'm Caleb Rohr, 29, and I never thought the first time my last name would feel like a question mark would be on my wedding day. If you've ever grown up in a family where one person is the sun and the rest of you are furniture arranged for the light, you already know my sister Sloane. She's 2 years younger, whip smart, and somehow always the headline, no matter what room she walks into. My parents, Diane and Greg, spent most of our childhood narrating Sloane's life like she was a documentary everyone had to fund. Piano recital that were precocious soccer wins that were historic, a science fair ribbon that prompted a laminated poster on the fridge. Meanwhile, if I brought home an A, the response was, usually that's solid, buddy, but let's not compare apples and Sloanes. It was their running joke. I laughed with them because the other option was to ask why I felt like a placeholder in my own house. It became a rhythm. Sloane got a driver's license. I shared my car. Sloane got into a good university. I worked extra shifts to help with dorm supplies. Sloane took an internship. My dad called it a career trajectory and asked me not to distract her when I visited home. My milestones took up less space because in a family like mine, attention is a finite resource, and Sloane had a lifetime subscription. I met Elena 3 years ago in a coffee shop near my office, the kind of place that believes string lights can fix any problem. She ordered tea and asked the barista how his test went because she remembered he was studying. That was the first thing I noticed about her, how easily she saw people. I was deep in a deadline for a client, and I had this habit of counting the things that were going right that day, so the noise didn't win. And I remember thinking, I met someone kind. We started talking because she asked if she could share my outlet, then stayed because we both laughed at the exact same line from the person on the phone behind us. Within months, my apartment, which had always felt like a waiting room, started to feel like a home. We built slow. We made a ritual of Tuesday omelets. We kept an old jar on the bookshelf where we'd fold up little memories and shove them in. First road trip, sputter. Elena's jacket left at the park. Found by a dog. Caleb's first bad haircut of 2023. So that on tough days we could remember we were made of more than a bad meeting. When I proposed, I did it in that same coffee shop with string lights above us and a slightly sticky table under our elbows. She said yes with both hands on my cheeks, like I was an answer she'd been looking for. By then, Sloane had become an analyst at a big firm downtown. The kind with glass walls and the kind of refrigerator where snacks appear without warning. She spoke about work like it was a weather pattern only she knew how to read. It was upside and signals and velocity, words that made my parents nod as if she was reading scripture. When we told my family we were engaged, they congratulated us. But the way my mom's eyes flicked to my sister first was as practiced as breathing. At brunch a week later, Mom said, we'll have to plan around Sloane's quarter. And of course not. Let's find a date that works for everyone, Justin Orbit declared without discussion. Sloane didn't even look up from her phone when she said, my calendar's a slaughterhouse, Thursdays are decent. Elena squeezed my knee under the table. We had already put a deposit on a venue for a Saturday in late spring, a date that felt like a storybook page. Sunflower's friends who could fly in the exact weekend, the venue had a string quartet available for the ceremony. My stomach tightened, but I said I'd send the save the dates and we could sort out details later. I have spent much of my life translating later into just make it work. From the start, wedding planning traced the old grooves in my family's dynamic. When we sent the invitations, my parents responded in the family group chat with "so proud of you both," followed within the hour by a link to an article about the youngest partner in Sloane's division, because this is the kind of talent Sloane's learning from. RSVPs trickled in. My aunt wrote a sweet message about how she couldn't wait to meet Elena's parents. My cousin asked if there would be an open bar, and then pretended her account was hacked when I said yes. Weeks went by. My immediate family didn't RSVP. I told myself they were busy. I told myself not to make it weird. It took Elena's maid of honor, Nora, to say out loud what I didn't want to admit. Are they trying to see if you'll move the date around Sloane? When I asked my mom about it, she said, oh, honey, we're coming. We're just not sure what the schedule is because Sloane has a big thing. And the phrase big thing was now a near religious relic. I asked what the big thing was. Mom smiled like she was granting me a favor. She's getting promoted. They're thinking of announcing it that weekend. It's all happening very fast. I didn't want my wedding to be a scheduling contest with my sister's job. So I did what I always do. I looked for a compromise. We moved our rehearsal dinner earlier so my family could attend a firm cocktail event on Friday. We adjusted the timeline so formal photos would be in the morning. If Sloane had to leave early, at least she'd be in the family shots. When Elena and I sat with our planner to finalize seating charts, I asked that my family be placed near the aisle so they wouldn't have to cross the room if they arrived late. Elena didn't love it. I could see it on her face, but she knew my history with them. Knew how hard it was for me to say, I want. Lies. The Saturday before the wedding, we did a last-minute visit to the venue to test the arch and check the sound system. I called my mom from the parking lot just to share the moment. She answered with, I can only talk for a minute. We're at Sloane's office for a surprise breakfast the board set up. It's so generous, Caleb. They even brought flowers. I said that was nice and told her the arch looked beautiful. She said, oh, we'll see it on the day. She said it like we were talking about a matinee show that could start without them. Elena's family, by contrast, showed up to everything. Her dad, Thomas, came early to the rehearsal to help carry cases of water. Her mom, Ruth, brought a cooler of cut fruit because she worried people would forget to eat while bustling. They circled us like a gentle weather system, calm, nourishing, unintrusive. In the final week, the text threads multiplied. Hair schedules, vendor checks, last-minute shoe decisions. My friends booked flights. My college roommate messaged me that he couldn't wait to roast me in his toast, and then immediately followed up to ask if that was acceptable because he didn't want to add stress. In our own small apartment, Elena and I pressed the last creases out of table numbers and wiped down the champagne flutes we'd splurged on with store credit from a wedding registry hack. We were doing it. It felt close enough to touch. Every time I started to imagine the day Elena walking toward me, my hands a little unsteady. Another thought would intrude, unwelcome but insistent. Where will my family be standing when she reaches me? 2 nights before the wedding, Sloane called. Hey, big day coming up, she said like she was commenting on the weather. I told her we were excited. She launched straight into logistics. So my team is doing a thing Saturday night. It's basically a dinner to announce the promotion. It's a big deal. Partners will be there. It's at the exact time of your reception. I said nothing. She continued. I can probably make your ceremony if it doesn't run long, but I'll have to head downtown right after photos. I'll swing back later if the dinner ends early. The words settled in like frost. I heard my voice come out quietly like I was listening to it from another room. Sloane, it's my wedding. She sighed as if I didn't understand how traffic works. Caleb, it's my career. This is the kind of signal you don't miss. I don't know how long I stayed silent long enough for her to fill it. Look, don't make this a thing. I'll try to be there for your vows. Okay, send me the address again. After we hung up, I stared at our wall of little folded memories in the jar and felt like someone had reached inside and shuffled them out of order. When I told my parents, they started on the chorus I knew by heart. This is a once-in-a-lifetime moment for your sister, Mom said. So is my wedding, I said. Dad cleared his throat in the way he does when he'd prefer to be elsewhere. Maybe we can celebrate your wedding and her promotion together, he suggested, as if whipping 2 cakes into one would make them both taste better. Elena watched me with that steady concentration she uses when solving anything complicated. Later, just the 2 of us at our kitchen table, she said, tell me what you want, not what they want you to be okay with. I told her I wanted my family to show up. I wanted to be a priority. I wanted this was the hardest part, to not feel embarrassed in front of her family and our friends. She slipped her hand into mine and said, then we do not shrink to make space for someone else's spotlight. We left the timeline as is. The morning of the wedding, I woke up early and watched the light hit the side of our building. My best man, Jonah, texted me a photo of him holding a coffee in one hand and a tie and a knot that made no geometric sense in the other. On my way, he wrote, followed by a string of encouraging words that made me grin. The venue's bridal suite was full of soft laughter and curling irons when I dropped off Elena's favorite snack, those tiny cheese crackers she calls happiness squares. She looked like herself, just more concentrated, like someone had turned up the clarity and brightness dials at the same time. Outside, the florist was threading eucalyptus through the arch. Someone tested the microphone. Each sound was a bell ringing in the right direction. I checked my phone. Nothing from my parents. The ceremony was at 2. At noon, I called my mom from the quiet of the hallway. It went a voicemail. I left a message that felt careful and practical. Hey, just confirming you have the address. Photos are at 1. See you soon. Half an hour later, my phone buzzed. A text from my dad. Running a little late. Save us seats. I showed it to Jonah, who raised his eyebrows and said nothing. Guests were already arriving, milling around the courtyard garden that Elena had loved the moment we saw it, with its string lights, always the string lights and brick walls that made the city sound like a distant ocean. Elena's parents hugged me and teased me for looking like I'd never tied a tie before. My aunt pulled me into a surprisingly fierce embrace and whispered, "You deserve every ounce of today." I thanked her in a voice that broke at the edges. At 1:15, with photos about to start, I called my mother again. Voicemail. I called Sloane. It rang once and then went to text. Can't talk. Heading into prep. Big night. Keep me posted. I stared at the words on my screen long enough that the letters started to vibrate. Our planner, a steady woman named Maribel, who had the calm of someone who solves crisis for sport, put a hand on my arm and said, "We can take photos with whoever is here. We'll make a plan for later rivals." I nodded. We took photos. Elena and I did the first look we debated for months and then finally agreed on because we wanted one moment to breathe together before the ceremony. When she rounded the corner and I saw her, the noise dropped out. It's strange how much love can quiet a person. The ceremony started on time. Rows of our friends and Elena's family turned toward me as music swelled. The seats reserved for my family in the front row were empty, their little white cards shining like unsent letters. I made a private decision right then. I would not look at those chairs while Elena walked toward me. I would look at her and read the promise we had written to each other the night before. All our small rituals braided into something we could hold in our hands. When I slid the ring onto her finger, and she slid one onto mine, I felt like we had done something a little rebellious in its simplicity. We chose each other without permission. We kissed. People cheered. I allowed myself 2 seconds to glance at the front row. Still empty. The music carried us down the aisle through bubbles and soft laughter. In the receiving line, friends shook my hand and Elena's college roommate cried in a way that made her makeup artist hover worriedly with a tissue. We moved into the cocktail hour. Nora handed Elena a glass of water like a secret mission. Our first dance song played on a loop quietly over the speakers so the band could rehearse the transitions. My phone stayed in my inner jacket pocket like a weight. I refused to adjust. By the time we cut the cake, a 3-tier thing Elena had described as not too fancy, but not like we made it ourselves with a cookbook from 1998, I had worked through the first wave of anger and moved into a numbness that felt like my body trying to protect me from embarrassment. The evening light had turned the courtyard gold. People were happy. The band had found that exact tempo that makes old men think they can still do the dip without chiropractors. We held the knife together, and I remembered reading somewhere that the first slice is a symbol. I made mine careful. The photographer said, "Perfect, one more." We fed each other a small bite because Elena hates the messy smearing thing. It gives her secondhand embarrassment. Everyone clapped softly like we had just learned how to breathe. And then my jacket humped. I thought it was just one buzz, but when I slipped my phone out discreetly, the screen lit up with an avalanche that made my chest go cold. 49 missed calls. The notification banner counted them like a drum roll. Mom, 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 dad, mom. Unknown number. Mom again. A new text slid onto the screen before my eyes could catch up with the tally. It was from my mother. I saw the first line and felt the room tilt a degree to the left. Caleb, pick up. Something happened. You need to. The message cut off and another appeared as if she was typing in a hurry. We didn't come because we had to be somewhere very important. You have to understand. But now the rest blinked into place. Just call me. It's Sloan. Elena felt my hand go still where it was resting on the tablecloth. What is it? She asked quietly in a voice meant for only me. I swallowed, hearing the band start the next song, the buzz of conversation continuing, the small kingdom of our day humming along unaware. My phone buzzed again, harder this time, as if insisting. The screen flashed a third message from my mother, and before my mind had time to decide how to feel, my eyes read the words that would make the air around me thinner than paper. Caleb, you need to come, please. My mother's texts burned at the edges of my mind while the music swirled around me. 49 missed calls. It was almost comical, except nothing about it felt funny. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and forced myself to smile when Elena's aunt tapped her glass with a fork and made some gentle joke about how we looked like a magazine couple. But my chest was heavy with a question that wouldn't quiet. What could possibly be more important than showing up for me? I already knew the answer, but I didn't want to say it aloud yet. Sloan, always Sloan. When the band started our first dance, I kept my eyes locked on Elena's because the alternative was scanning those empty seats, each one screaming louder than the music. My mother's words replayed like a cruel soundtrack. We didn't come because we had to be somewhere very important. Not we couldn't. Not we're sorry, but we chose. The knife twisted with every slow step across the dance floor. Elena whispered, "You don't have to hide it from me. I know." Her voice was steady, but I saw the flicker of pain too, because this wasn't just about me anymore. They had disrespected her too. My family had left their absence sitting in the front row like an accusation. After the dance, Jonah pulled me aside. He's blunt, always has been. "You going to tell me why your parents think RSVPs are optional?" he asked, folding his arms. I hesitated, then showed him the screen with the missed calls. He read the text, his jaw tightening. So let me get this straight, he said, lowering his voice. They skipped your wedding to attend your sister's work dinner. His words made it sound absurd, but that's exactly what it was. My throat burnt. It's her promotion, I muttered, as if saying it softer would make it more reasonable. Jonah shook his head. Man, I don't care if she got Ned. This is your wedding. They're making a choice. Don't let them sell you otherwise. I wanted to believe he was wrong, but the pattern was too familiar. Flashbacks stacked up like unwanted Polaroids. Sloane's high school graduation party when they moved my birthday dinner to the next week so she could celebrate uninterrupted. My college graduation where they arrived late because traffic from Sloane's recital was a nightmare. My first big client pitch when I called to share the good news and Mom said, "That's nice, honey. Sloane just got invited to present in New York. Always her, always a reason. Always me adjusting, swallowing, shrinking." The worst part was the messages kept coming. During dinner, my pocket vibrated again and again. At one point, Elena caught my hand under the table, squeezing it so firmly I thought she was silently telling me, "Don't check." But I did. Another text from Mom. "Caleb, please understand. You'll thank us later." A fresh sting of betrayal flared. Thank them for what? For proving yet again that no matter how much I built for myself, I'd always be a shadow in their eyes. I could almost hear Mom's voice calm and clipped. "Don't be dramatic. We'll celebrate you too eventually." That too always carved me down. When dessert came out, I noticed Elena's parents looking between us, reading my face the way only parents can. Her dad leaned over and quietly asked, "Do you want me to handle the calls? Just tell them you're busy." I shook my head, grateful and humiliated all at once. My own parents hadn't even shown up and hers were offering to take the bullets for me. I excused myself to the hallway. Phone clutched like it might crack under the weight of their words. I called my mom for the first time all day. She picked up immediately. Her voice was bright, almost celebratory like she'd had champagne. "Caleb, finally." "Listen, sweetheart, don't be upset. We just had to be here tonight for Sloane. This is monumental for her career. Do you understand?" I froze. Behind her, I heard laughter, clinking glasses, the buzz of a crowded room. She wasn't whispering. She wasn't apologizing. She was justifying. "It's my wedding," I said, my voice low shaking. "Do you understand that?" There was a pause, like she was debating whether I deserved to be spoken to as an equal. Then Dad's voice, muffled but clear enough, cut in. "Tell him we'll swing by after the dinner. Maybe catch the last bit. Swing by like my wedding was an afterthought, a dessert option after the main meal." When I returned to the reception, Jonah caught my face before I could mask it. "What did they say?" he asked. I just shook my head. Elena looked at me across the dance floor, eyes searching mine. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just a missed event. This was a choice that would stain every family gathering from here on. They had drawn a line, and for the first time, I felt the beginning of a thought I'd never let myself consider before. Maybe I didn't have to stand on the side of the line they'd drawn. But before I could process that fully, my phone buzzed again. This time, not a call. A string of texts from numbers I didn't recognize, each one the same, copied and pasted like someone had blasted them out to everyone. "Congratulations to Sloane on her big promotion tonight. Such a proud family moment." My stomach dropped. My parents hadn't just chosen her, they were broadcasting it while my wedding, my vows, my life with Elena was treated like background noise. And that was when the buzzing stopped being background. It became the soundtrack of the night. And it became clear that this wasn't going to fade quietly. It was going to escalate. I thought the copied text from strangers would be the peak of it, that nothing could sting harder than watching my own wedding shrink into the background of someone else's victory parade. But betrayal doesn't just arrive at the door. It settles in, pulls up a chair, and makes itself comfortable until you can't ignore it anymore. And that's exactly what happened. As the night unfolded, Elena and I had just finished the rounds of thank yous weaving between tables, while friends clinked glasses and cousins made jokes about who would catch the bouquet. I was clinging to the joy in the room, determined to hold on to what was mine. But halfway through our walk, Jonah caught my shoulder, face pale. "Caleb," he said quietly, "you need to see this." He turned his phone toward me. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. It was a photo already posted online by one of Sloane's colleagues. A glittering banquet hall, chandeliers glowing, and right in the middle of it, my family, Mom, Dad, and Sloane arms linked, all grinning. The caption read, "Celebrating the unstoppable Sloane Roar, newly promoted to vice president." What a night. The timestamp made my throat close. Posted 15 minutes ago, which meant while Elena and I were thanking our guests for being here, my family was busy smiling for cameras at my sister's dinner. The photo spread fast. Guests at my wedding began noticing it too. Phones buzzed, screens lit up, whispers traveled table to table. By the time I returned to my seat, Elena's maid of honor leaned across the table with an expression equal parts pity and anger. Caleb, I'm so sorry. People are talking. My chest constricted. It wasn't just the absence anymore. It was public. It was deliberate. My family hadn't simply skipped my wedding. They had chosen to showcase their presence elsewhere, as if erasing me from the narrative was the natural order of things. Then came the text that broke something inside me. My mom again. We couldn't miss this night, sweetheart. It's history for Sloan. But don't worry, we'll stop by your reception later for a toast. Save us some cake. My hand trembled as I read it aloud to Elena, my voice cracking on the last line. Save them some cake, as if my wedding was a buffet that would keep warm until their real plans were finished. Elena's eyes glistened, but her jaw set hard. Caleb, she whispered, they don't see you. They never have. That was when Jonah pulled me aside again, this time more forcefully. He pressed a second phone into my hand. It wasn't his. It belonged to one of our mutual friends who followed more of Sloane's coworkers. On the screen, another photo from the dinner. This one made my stomach flip. My parents were on stage holding microphones, giving a toast to Sloane. My mother beamed in the photo, champagne flute raised high, while the caption read, "Proud parents of our star tonight." But what gutted me wasn't just their joy. It was the words scrolled on the screen behind them in bold, glowing letters, celebrating Sloane Roar, the real star of the family. I couldn't breathe. My mind replayed it over and over. They hadn't just celebrated her. They had branded the night with a phrase that erased me entirely. My wedding was happening at that very moment. Yet they were toasting Sloane as the real star of the family. My fists clenched so hard my nails bit into my palms. All the years of smaller slights, the forgotten birthdays, the overshadowed milestones, the brushed-off calls, collapsed into that single searing phrase. It wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was confirmation. Proof that in their eyes I was never meant to be anything but a supporting role. When I returned to the table, I couldn't fake it anymore. Elena touched my arm gently, searching my face. "What happened?" she asked. I showed her the photo. Her expression darkened. The whispers in the room had grown louder now. My guests had seen it too. Some of them looked at me with sympathy, others with disbelief, but all of them knew. My parents had humiliated me publicly on the most important night of my life. And then, as if to twist the knife, my phone buzzed again with another message. This one longer, frantic. "Mom, we'll try to make it before midnight, Caleb. But if we can't just remember, we'll always be proud of you too, in our own way. Tonight is Sloane's moment. You'll understand when you're older." That line, "when you're older," snapped something in me. I was 29. I had built a career. I was standing beside the woman I loved. And still in their eyes, I was a child playing at adulthood, expected to step aside for the real star. The betrayal wasn't just about skipping my wedding. It was about declaring to the world that my life was an afterthought. And as I stared at the glowing words on that photo, the real star of the family, I felt something colder than anger settle in my chest, something sharper. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just hurt, I was done. That was the exact moment the idea of revenge stopped being a fleeting thought in the back of my mind and became a living, breathing certainty. But I didn't act yet. Not then. Because what happened next at the reception made the betrayal cut even deeper and pushed me past a line I could never uncross. The reception carried on around me, but I felt like I was standing behind a pane of glass, watching a life that looked like mine, but didn't quite fit anymore. Laughter rose and fell, silverware clinked. Someone's uncle tried to impress the younger guests with dance moves that should have been retired decades ago. All of it blurred into background noise. My focus kept sliding back to those empty front row seats, the photographs I'd seen on Jonah's phone, and my mother's words echoing in my skull, the real star of the family. I sat down hard at the head table, staring into the untouched slice of cake in front of me. The fork rested perfectly parallel to the plate, like it had been placed by someone who knew what weddings were supposed to look like. My stomach, however, turned at the thought of taking a single bite. Elena leaned close, her perfume soft and familiar, her voice careful. "Do you want to leave for a minute? Just the two of us?" She meant well, but leaving my own reception felt like surrender. I shook my head, though my throat tightened with every syllable. "No, this is our day. I can't walk out." Her hand slid into mine, steady grounding, but the guilt gnawed at me anyway. She shouldn't have had to be my anchor tonight. This was supposed to be about us, about the vows we had made only hours earlier. Instead, she was watching me collapse under the weight of a family that had never really wanted to carry me at all. And the worst part, guests had noticed. I caught sympathetic glances, overheard quiet whispers. I can't believe they didn't come. Poor guy. Who does that to their own son? Every whisper scraped across my pride. I hated being pitted. Halfway through the evening, I excused myself and wandered to the edge of the courtyard where the string lights faded into the shadows of the brick walls. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, another text, but I didn't pull it out. I didn't want more words that would slice me open. I leaned against the cold wall, staring at the cobblestones. For the first time, I let myself think the thought I had spent years avoiding. Maybe I didn't have a family, at least not one in the way people meant when they said the word. Blood wasn't enough if it bled you dry. Jonah found me there. Of course he always did. He didn't try to talk me out of my silence. He just stood beside me, hands shoved in his pockets, until finally he muttered, "You don't deserve this. You never did." My jaw clenched. I wanted to argue, to play devil's advocate like I always did for my parents, but no words came. Instead, I asked something I'd never dared before. Am I crazy to think this is the last straw?" Jonah turned his head, studied me like he was making sure I was serious. "Caleb, the crazy thing would be forgiving them again. You keep giving them rope and all they do is tighten it around your neck." His words hit harder than he probably intended, but I needed the sting. I returned to the reception after that, but the night felt hollow. I laughed when people told jokes, posed for photos with Elena, even tried to enjoy the dancing, but inside I was drifting. My parents' absence was a ghost hovering at every table. When I looked at the framed seating chart by the entrance, the little card that said reserved family of the groom felt like mockery. They had RVVPD in spirit, but in practice they had RSVP'd to my sister's future instead. The final humiliation came near the end of the night. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd at least show up late as promised, sneak in for the toast, pretend to care. But as the band played its last song and Elena and I made our way toward the exit through a tunnel of sparklers, my phone buzzed one last time. A new message from Mom. "We didn't want to interrupt your night. Sloane's dinner went later than expected. We'll come by tomorrow to see you too. Be proud, Caleb. You've had a lovely day, and tonight, so did your sister. What a blessing for the family." That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement of the wound they'd carved. Just a neat little bow tying my wedding and my sister's promotion together as if they were equal milestones in the family ledger. The anger I'd felt earlier had burned out, leaving only ash. I didn't even reply. I powered my phone off and slipped it into Elena's bag. She gave me a look, half question, half relief, but didn't press. She knew. As Elena and I climbed into the car, waiting to take us to our hotel, the cheers of our friends fading behind us. I stared out the window at the blur of city lights, something hardened inside me. This wasn't just another slight to swallow. This was final. I'd hit rock bottom with them. And maybe that was exactly what I needed. Because in the silence of that car ride, while Elena rested her head on my shoulder, I began to sketch the first lines of a plan that would make them feel the weight of their choices in ways they never expected. I didn't know the details yet, but one thought repeated like a drumbeat in my chest. If they wanted to crown Sloane the star of the family, then I would show them what happens when the star burns too bright and leaves everyone else in the dark. The morning after the wedding, sunlight streamed through the hotel curtains, catching on the white folds of Elena's dress where she draped it across the chair. For a long time, I just lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind numb from the night before. I should have been replaying our vows, the dance, her smile under the string lights. Instead, I kept seeing my parents on that stage, champagne flutes lifted high, words glowing behind them, the real star of the family. Elena stirred beside me, her hair tousled, her face soft with sleep. She opened her eyes and gave me the kind of smile that used to fix everything. But I must not have smiled back because her brow furrowed. Still thinking about them, she asked gently. I nodded, ashamed. She touched my cheek. "Then don't. Not today. Today we start us." It sounded simple when she said it, and in that moment I wanted to believe her. We spent the next week on our honeymoon in a quiet coastal town, walking beaches at dusk, eating dinners where the biggest decision was whether to order wine or dessert. I turned my phone on once, out of habit, only to find dozens of unread messages from my parents. None of them apologies, just updates about Sloane's new role, her glowing LinkedIn post, her quote in some industry article. My chest tightened and I shut it off again. Elena caught me staring at the blank screen that night. "Caleb," she said firmly, "you don't have to keep hurting yourself. You're allowed to choose peace." Something about those words struck deep. Allowed to choose peace. For so long, I'd lived as though peace was only granted if my parents approved, if my sister allowed me to stand in her light. But lying there beside Elena in a room filled with nothing but the sound of waves, I felt the faintest spark of something different: control. When we came back, I threw myself into work. I'm an architect, and at the time I was juggling mid-tier projects for commercial spaces, safe, profitable, but unremarkable. The betrayal at my wedding had left me restless raw, like I needed to prove something not to them, but to myself. So I took a risk. I pitched a bold design to a client who wanted a mixed-use building downtown. My colleagues thought it was too ambitious, too expensive, but the client's eyes lit up. "This isn't just a building," he said. "It's a landmark." We won the bid. That project became my obsession. I stayed late, refined every detail, fought for the design against skeptics in boardrooms, and when construction began, it turned heads across the city. By the time the ribbon cutting came, the mayor was there, cameras flashing articles labeling me a rising star in urban design. It was surreal. For the first time, my name wasn't a footnote. It was the headline. With success came opportunities. More clients sought me out. My firm made me partner within a year. Money followed more than I'd ever expected to see. Elena and I bought a home. Our home, not an apartment waiting for permission to feel permanent. We filled it with books and music and late-night takeout containers. We hosted friends, family dinners with her parents, and the kind of laughter that echoed down the hallways. And slowly, brick by brick, I built a life where I wasn't waiting for scraps of validation from my parents. But here's the thing about power. It doesn't just give you options, it gives you perspective. The more my career grew, the more I realized just how small my parents' shadow really was. They had made me feel invisible for so long. But standing on stages, giving interviews, watching my designs, reshaped city blocks, I saw how visible I could be without them. Of course, my parents noticed. They reached out more often, though their words were always laced with the same tone. We saw the article. Mom said once over the phone, her voice almost rehearsed. "So proud of you, sweetheart." Sloan was saying how much this reminds her of her own big break last year. Always circling it back to Sloan, always comparing. But this time, I didn't flinch. I didn't beg for more. I let their words roll off because I no longer needed them to validate me. Elena noticed the shift before I did. One night after a dinner party at our new house, she pulled me aside. "You're different," she said softly. Lighter, stronger. She wasn't wrong. The betrayal at my wedding had nearly broken me, but in the rubble, I'd built something new, something stronger than before. And though I hadn't told her yet, a part of me was already beginning to calculate, to imagine how one day all this growth could become something else entirely, something sharp. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just about rising. It was about showing my family. One day, what happens when the son they dismissed stops asking for a seat at their table and builds his own table so big they can't ignore it. It was 2 years after the wedding when the first crack in Sloan's perfect facade appeared, though at the time it looked like nothing more than a whisper. By then, I was settled into my role as partner at the firm. Our downtown project had become a case study in design schools. Elena and I had just welcomed our first child, a son we named Evan, and my days felt full in a way I never thought possible. Mornings with coffee and baby giggles. Evenings drafting blueprints while Elena read nearby. Weekends hosting friends who had become more like family. My parents, meanwhile, had become distant satellites. We exchanged the occasional strained call, but I kept them at arm's length. They still managed to turn every conversation into a monologue about Sloane's latest triumph, as if my life was a commercial break between her episodes. Then, one afternoon at a networking event downtown, I found myself chatting with a man named Richard, an older partner at a rival firm. We were comparing notes on city zoning regulations when he leaned closer and lowered his voice. "You're Sloan Roar's brother, aren't you?" My chest tightened at the question, but I nodded cautiously. Richard chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Bright girl, sure, but her divisions stretched thin. "She's playing with fire. Heard her name come up in connection with some risky numbers." At first, I brushed it off. My parents had always painted Sloan as infallible, but the seed was planted. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things I hadn't before. Articles praising her firm now mentioned challenging quarters buried in the fine print. A former classmate of mine who worked in finance dropped her name during lunch, shaking his head. "She's talented, but aggressive. One misstep and it'll all come crashing down." I didn't go digging yet, but I stored every piece of information carefully, like puzzle fragments waiting for their moment. Meanwhile, my own influence kept expanding. The firm tapped me to lead a multi-ID project, a contract that would tie me directly to government committees and influential investors. It was the kind of role that didn't just build buildings. It built reputations, networks, leverage. For the first time, people weren't just treating me as a talented architect. They were treating me as someone who shaped the future of the city. Invitations flooded in, panels, galas, charity boards. I accepted most of them. Every handshake, every introduction was another brick in the foundation of something much larger than I'd ever imagined. Elena supported me through it all. She teased me when I practiced speeches in front of the mirror, reassured me when I doubted myself. and reminded me of what really mattered whenever the weight of responsibility pressed too hard. Together, we became a team. People noticed at events, people would comment on how grounded we were, how balanced. I could see the envy in some eyes, the respect in others. It felt like finally, after years of being the forgotten son, I was living in full view. It was around this time that my parents reappeared with renewed interest. They wanted to visit more often, invited us to family dinners, sent gifts for Evan, but every invitation came with a familiar refrain. You'll get to see your sister too. She's just been promoted again. It was clear they weren't reconnecting with me. They were trying to keep me tethered to her orbit as if my success was only valid if framed alongside hers. The turning point came one evening at a gala where I'd been asked to present an award. My speech went well. Afterward, as I mingled, I heard my name from across the room. I turned to see Sloane herself, dressed in a sleek black gown, parents flanking her like proud book hints. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Caleb, she said smoothly. Impressive speech. You're really making a name for yourself. Her tone carried that subtle edge as though my accomplishments were surprising, almost inconvenient. We chatted politely, but what struck me wasn't her words. It was the way people were watching us. For once, the spotlight wasn't automatically hers. Investors, colleagues, even city officials were gravitating toward me. I caught the flicker of irritation in her expression each time someone asked me a question instead of her. That was when it clicked. For the first time in our lives, I was no longer standing in her shadow. She was standing in mine. That realization alone would have been enough to shift the balance. But then came the detail that sharpened it into something more. A mutual contact tipsy on champagne leaned in later that night and muttered, "Your sister's firm is trying to land the midtown redevelopment contract. Word is she's leading the pitch." I froze. Midtown redevelopment. The same project my firm had been eyeing. The one the city council was about to open bids for. I smiled politely, but inside the pieces clicked together with startling clarity. My sister was about to fight for the very kind of project that had defined my rise. And I was in the perfect position to challenge her not just as an architect, but as someone who had cultivated influence, respect, and allies she didn't even know I had. As Elena and I drove home that night, she glanced at me, reading the quiet calculation in my expression. "You're thinking about something," she said softly. I hesitated, then replied, "I think the time is coming." She didn't ask for details. She just nodded, slipping her hand into mine. She knew. That night, lying awake beside her, I stared at the ceiling again. But this time the weight in my chest wasn't despair. It was resolve. My family had crowned Sloane the star of the family on my wedding night, but now fate had handed me a stage of my own. And for the first time in my life, I had the power not just to stand in the light, but to decide who deserved to stay in it. The Midtown redevelopment project was the kind of opportunity that only came once in a generation. Whoever won it would shape the face of the city for decades and cement their reputation as a leader in their field. For Sloane, it was a chance to prove she was more than just a corporate climber. It would make her a public figure. For me, it was the perfect battleground. From the moment I heard her firm was pitching, I knew what I had to do. I didn't storm into meetings with vengeance written on my face. I didn't call my parents to gloat or confront my sister outright. No, this wasn't about loudness. It was about precision, quiet, steady, deliberate. If they had branded Sloane as the real star of the family on my wedding night, then I would show them how quickly stars burn out when you remove the oxygen. First, I leaned into the network I'd built. Over the past year, I'd sat on panels with city planners, shared meals with council members, and donated to community initiatives that meant something to the people making decisions. None of it had been calculated at the time. It was just the natural extension of growing influence. But now, every handshake, every thank you note, every favor remembered became part of my arsenal. I made sure the right people understood that my firm's vision for Midtown wasn't just about buildings. It was about community sustainability, long-term growth, the language of legacy, the kind of language politicians love because it echoes in headlines. Sloane's firm, on the other hand, was known for speed and numbers. They promised efficiency, profits, quick returns. And while that impressed boardrooms, it didn't land as well in city council chambers, where reputations were built on serving the public good. I didn't need to sabotage her. All I had to do was highlight what we were offering. Calm, steady, undeniable. But I didn't stop there. Quietly, I gathered what Richard had hinted at months before. My sister's firm's financial risks. Nothing illegal, but enough aggressive accounting and speculative ventures to make any city nervous about handing them a multi-billion-dollar redevelopment contract. I compiled the data, carefully framing it not as an attack, but as due diligence. When we submitted our proposal, it included a discrete appendix, a comparison of our stability versus our competitors' volatility. I didn't even have to name her outright. Numbers spoke louder than I ever could. The day of the pitch arrived. Elena kissed me before I left the house. Her eyes steady, her words simple. Show them who you are. I walked into that council chamber with my team behind me. Every detail of our presentation polished to perfection. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't think about Sloan. I thought about the empty seats at my wedding. I thought about my mother's words. You'll understand when you're older. I thought about the little boy asleep at home who deserved to grow up knowing his father never let himself be erased. Our pitch landed like thunder. The renderings drew gasps. The sustainability models sparked applause. By the time I finished, I could see it in their faces. We had it. Sloane's firm presented afterward polished and confident. But I noticed something in her delivery, a tightness around the edges. She knew she was competing against me. And for the first time in her life, she didn't have the advantage of parents whispering in the audience or a family narrative carrying her forward. She was alone up there, and she looked it. 2 weeks later, the decision was announced. My firm had won the contract. The press release described our vision as transformational and a project for the people. I stood on stage at the press conference, shaking hands with city officials, cameras flashing my name plastered across headlines. My parents weren't there to see it. My sister wasn't either, but I didn't need them. I knew they'd see it anyway, because how could they not? That evening, my phone lit up with a text from my mother. Caleb, we saw the news. Congratulations. Of course, it's a shame your sister's firm didn't win, but we're still proud of you. Maybe next time we can all celebrate together. I stared at the message for a long time, then set the phone down without replying. The silence was my answer. Revenge. I realized didn't always have to be loud. Sometimes it was as simple as building so high that the people who once looked down on you were forced to crane their necks just to keep up. My parents had crowned Sloan the star of the family at my wedding. But now, the city itself had placed me at the center of its story. And for the first time, I felt something I hadn't in years. Not just vindicated, but untouchably free. Yet the true reckoning didn't come with the contract. It came later when my parents and sister tried to step back into my life as if nothing had happened. That was when the real fallout began, because by then, I wasn't just in a position of strength. I was in a position to decide how much of me they were even allowed to see. The fallout began quietly, like a slow leak no one notices until the floor is soaked. After my firm won the Midtown redevelopment contract, articles poured out about the project, my name attached to each one. I was interviewed on the radio, invited to speak at universities, even asked to consult for other cities looking to revitalize their downtowns. My parents didn't call for a few weeks, maybe hoping the excitement would fade. But when it didn't, when the world kept repeating my name instead of Sloane's, they showed up literally. One Saturday morning, Elena and I were in the yard with Evan watching him wobble his first steps across the grass when I saw my parents' car pull into the driveway. They stepped out as if nothing had ever happened, smiles plastered on their faces, a gift bag dangling from my mother's hand. "Surprise," she said, her voice too bright. "We thought we'd come celebrate your big win as a family." I stood there silent, watching Evan cling to Elena's leg. My father stepped forward, nodding toward the house. "We could have a toast inside." We brought champagne. His tone was casual, as if he hadn't skipped my wedding to raise a glass to Sloan, as if they hadn't called her the real star of the family. While my vows went unheard, Sloan wasn't far behind. She arrived 10 minutes later, pulling up in her sleek car heels, clicking confidently against the pavement. She walked over, sunglasses still on, and offered a stiff hug. I didn't return. "Congratulations, Caleb," she said smoothly. Of course I was disappointed about the contract, but, well, at least it stayed in the family. Her words landed like acid. At least it stayed in the family. As though my victory was hers by extension, I took a deep breath, feeling Elena's steady presence beside me, Jonah's words echoing in my memory. "You keep giving them rope and all they do is tighten it around your neck." "Not anymore." "Come inside," I said. My voice was calm, almost too calm. They looked relieved, as though they'd been granted easy forgiveness. Inside, we sat around the dining table, the one Elena and I had picked out together, the one stained with late-night pasta dinners and homework scribbles. My parents placed the champagne in the middle like a peace offering. My mother smiled. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart. It's wonderful to see both of our children doing so well." That was it, the final straw. Both of our children. As though my success only existed in relation to Sloane's, as though my rise wasn't my own. I leaned forward, hands folded on the table. "You didn't come to my wedding," I said quietly. Their smiles faltered. "You stood on a stage that night and called Sloan the real star of the family. While I was saying my vows, while Elena was walking down the aisle, while those seats reserved for you sat empty, you were cheering her. And you think you can walk in here now and toast with champagne like nothing happened? The silence was deafening. My mother opened her mouth, but I raised a hand to stop her. No, you've had your say for years. This is mine. You chose her over me every time. And now you don't get to choose me because the world finally sees me without your permission. My father shifted uncomfortably. Caleb, don't be so harsh. We're family. Blood is nothing if it bleeds you dry. I cut in. My voice was sharper now, but steady. I turned to Sloane, whose expression had curdled into something between anger and disbelief. And you've built your entire identity on being the center. But you're not anymore. Not here. Not in this city. People see you for what you are. Aggressive, reckless, replaceable. I didn't need to sabotage you, I just had to show up. And the spotlight shifted on its own. Her jaw clenched, but she said nothing. My parents looked between us as if unsure which child to defend. For the first time in my life, they had no script to follow. I stood. This is the last time you'll be in my house without an invitation. If you want to be in my son's life, if you want any place in mine, it won't be on your terms. It will be on mine. And if you can't respect that, then we're done. The weight of my words hung in the air. My mother's eyes welled with tears. My father stared at the table. Sloane's lips pressed into a thin line, her pride crumbling beneath the quiet truth, but none of them spoke. Not one. I picked up the champagne bottle they brought, walked it to the door, and set it outside. You can take it with you, I said, my back turned. We don't need it. Elena rose and slipped her hand into mine, her other hand resting on Evan's tiny shoulder. Together we stood in the doorway as my parents shuffled out, their practiced smiles gone. Sloane followed sunglasses back in place to hide what her face couldn't. They drove away without another word, the gift bag still swinging uselessly in my mother's hand. As their car disappeared down the street, I exhaled a weight lifting that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying all my life. Elena squeezed my hand, whispering, "You did it." I looked down at my son, his eyes wide, his little fingers clutching mine, and I knew without doubt that he would grow up never questioning whether he mattered. He would never sit in empty seats reserved for love that never arrived. That night, after putting Evan to bed, I sat with Elena on our back porch, the city skyline glowing in the distance, the very skyline I was now shaping. I raised my glass of wine, not champagne, and said quietly, "Here's to family. The one we build, not the one we're forced into." Elena clinked her glass against mine, and for the first time in my life, I felt the chapter close completely. They had called Sloane the star of the family, but stars burn out. What I had built wasn't a flash in the sky. It was a foundation steady and unshakable. And as I sat there, the city lights stretching far into the horizon, I knew my story had never been about their spotlight. It was about creating my own, and this time no one could take it.